I am going to beat you into the living death.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Walkout Network. It's your man, Ant Walker, here with the latest edition of the Living Death Show. Of course, every week I introduce these two gentlemen who need no introduction, but we love them so much. Let's do it again. First up is the jack of all trades who has mastered them all. He is the senior editor of Sherdog.com and the big homie, Ben Duffy. What's up, Ben?
Hey, I'm doing really well. Good as always to be back with you guys.
Definitely been looking forward to this. And of course, we've got the man who anchors the panel every week with the stats, the facts, the figures, and the numbers, and also the prophecies. The associate editor of Sherdog.com and our resident Nostradamus, Jay Pettry. What's going on?
I feel like I need to pull that. I wonder what it's going to be type of thing that we saw on, what was it, First Take? With the Jazz, yeah, okay, yeah, you know what I'm referencing.
Yeah.
Oh man, what a week, guys! I don't even know what to say. Like, we have an important thing to talk about before we dive into the fights. So I don't want to get too bogged down into it, but I can't think of many weirder fight weeks outside of the event that you had to deal with live and in person, Mr. Walker, traveling to Las Vegas, then go, oh, no, just kidding, California. But this has to be right there with it.
Yeah, definitely had a lot of flashbacks to UFC 232 as this was going on. But anyway, let's before we dive into that, because we definitely will have a lot to say about UFC 279. But first, we have to get to some really, really tragic news that broke last night. I saw this on my Twitter feed just before midnight. So I'm not sure exactly when in the day this happened, but UFC vet, former ring boy for Invicta, actually, man known, loved and respected a lot in the mixed martial arts world, Elias Theodorou, passed away due to an advanced liver cancer. Something that he dealt with for some time, apparently, and kept quiet other than his close inner circle. So, I mean, he competed as recently as December. Got a win, actually went undefeated on the regional circuit after leaving the UFC. I haven't seen anything about when he was diagnosed or when he started feeling like something was wrong and went to the doctor and whatnot. But you got to think, man, beyond the fact this man was 34, how much of a tragedy it is, like, to be otherworldly tough, to endure a deadly disease, keep it to yourself. And I'm kind of at a loss for words here. Gentlemen, what were your thoughts when this first popped up on the timeline?
Go ahead, Ben.
I was shocked, for one thing. It's even, not that far removed from when we were talking about Chadwick Boseman. It's just strange for a public figure, and obviously Elias Theodorou was not a public figure on the level of Chadwick Boseman, but somebody that, as someone embedded in the mixed martial arts community, I figured I would have heard or would have known, even quietly, if he hadn't made it public, like I would have known from somebody, and it just completely took me by surprise. And yeah, it's sad. He's universally regarded as just a kind and personable individual. Did a lot of cool stuff. The Invicta ring card boy thing, being the first fighter to compete with TUE for cannabis, just slight pushes in a more progressive direction for this very regressive sport sometimes. It's tragic. It's sad.
As a guy who deals a lot with Fight Finder, my first immediate thought, but other than, oh my gosh, this is really sad, I'm shocked by this news, is wait a second, he just fought 9 months ago. And I remember, because I looked it up and it was paying attention to it. I might have even helped find the information to put it in the database. Like, he beat a longtime Bellator vet, Brian Baker. And before that, he had beaten Matt Dwyer and Hernani Perpetua. So he's not. So when he left the UFC, they're respectable outside names.
Speaking of irony, Brian Baker is a fighter who famously beat cancer and came back to have an entire career.
That's an excellent point I didn't even think of until right this second. But I couldn't help but think, how was he allowed to compete? Because they test you and screen you medically. He was in Colorado. it wasn't some, bumbleshoot jurisdiction. It's a Colorado's one of the more progressive on the ball states that just out in the union right now, so to speak. And to see that happen, it just made me go, oh my gosh, he did that. He competed while having, stage 4 liver cancer, which doesn't just go, oh, here it is. You don't just wake up with it one day. This is something that builds up and grows. So that he was dealing with all of that. I mean, obviously he wasn't doing chemo or anything that we knew of, because he was still, fully bearded and hair and positivity and everything like that. So we wouldn't have had any idea, other than his very close inner circle. I'm going to miss him. A lot of people ragged on him and, oh, he was a decisionator. Oh, it wasn't. So what? You know who else was? Diego Sanchez. And I think people kind of, have their thoughts on Diego Sanchez. George St. Pierre is one of the best fighters that's ever fought, and he had a lot of decisions. But that's not the point. He competed at the highest level of the sport. He made some changes for good, and he was the best part about Elias Theodorou that I knew. I only interacted with him one time, and it was before I was really in the media space for like a professional level that I am now. So I was just like a goofball on the forums trying to get him to do a Q&A with us on the forums. And he couldn't have been more gracious with his time and just accommodating for just some goof to be like, hey, hi, I Sure Dog Forum is a thing. You want to talk to people that are also very mean? And he took the time to say, oh, I love to. Here's my fight schedule. Here's what we're doing this. It didn't end up coming together, but that he even took the time and was very cordial and friendly and professional was a really a breath of fresh air. And I know that to all those that knew him, he was nothing but a great guy. And that's one of the things that is it's hard pressed to find something bad to say about him. Like, I saw people whine and be like, oh yeah, he was a boring fighter. Shut up. He was a good guy. He was a great guy. Everybody loved him. What are you talking about? And it's just, it's sad to see him go, and it's a shame that this happened the way it did.
Yeah, I've had one interaction with him that I can recall, just via Twitter, just a stupid joke I made to former Sherdog radio head TJ DeSantis, and he, my Sexiest Man Alive jokes. And he taking my words and say, oh, I wasn't talking about Elias. And Elias actually replied to that and engaged a little back and forth. And, he seemed like a really nice guy, a guy who genuinely just had a good time and cared about the people around him. Yeah. And that's one thing that I've consistently heard from the several people I know, you included, Jay, that have interacted with him, just like a kindness that sort of radiated out of him. Now, as far as the commission is concerned, I'm not shocked at all that even a commission that is normally on it as Colorado is would have someone competing that they didn't know had, advanced liver cancer. Michael Bisping won a UFC title, defended it with one eye. Like, the career resurgence he had, it was like, what, a 5-fight career resurgence that he had with one eye. And this guy was competing in Vegas. He's competing in London. He's competing in Los Angeles. Like, he's in places where they really care about
New York.
New York. Like, where they're trying to make sure fighters are safe as much as they can in a lot of these states. And he was competing with one eye. So if they can't literally see that a person has a false eye that isn't following their finger, I'm not surprised that they didn't see that this man Theodorou was gravely ill. That doesn't shock me in the least bit. And also, too, depending on how aggressive the cancer was, maybe this diagnosis happened after the fight and it advanced that quickly. I think most people who have seen someone pass away from cancer, they know how quickly it can progress depending on how it's treated or not treated, or when it's diagnosed and whatnot. So, definitely a lot of questions to be answered, and I'm sure we'll get some of those answers sooner than later. But now it's just the time to say rest in peace, Elias Theodorou, and thank you for what you've done for the sport. So very, very terrible news that we have to start out with. But let's go ahead and get into the foolishness, because UFC 279, when we were trying to name it, last week. We came up with all our names. The one name that really should have stuck was UFC 279 foolishness.
Outside garbage.
Yes. 279 fuckery or whatever the case may be.
Dumpster fire.
Yeah. What an amazing fight week. Well, I should say like the day before the fight. Weigh-ins until fight night. Like how crazy of a turn of events was that? Like what, guys, would you say that the catastrophic weight miss by Khamzat Chimaev and the dismantling of the card from there, was that the worst case scenario for the UFC in that moment?
I think it could have been a little worse had the fights been scratched and they had to dump a pay-per-view, because this is a T-Mobile. A T-Mobile is going to get $4 to $6 mil. You know, it's a good gate. It's not a Conor gate, but it's going to be a good chunk of change that would have had to forfeit for losing that, and plus the pay-per-view revenue and everything like that. So it could have been worse, but not by much. I think that the totality of the circumstances was about the worst thing that could have happened for each of the individuals that the UFC, because we know the UFC favors fighters and wants certain fighters to get over so they can succeed and be able to market and sell them. But the UFC came up short, and coming up short happens to be the stat of the week that I decided to hold until this segment. The stat of the week is 208. Because 209 is the Stockton thing. We all know the 209. And 208 just so happens to be the number of fight cards that John Anik with the 209 tattoo has called. It was his 208th fight card instead of his 209th, what he was calling a Diaz fight. And it also happens to be 208 is the official time of the stoppage into the rear, left in the fourth round. It was not 209 like everybody wished it was, but the fight concluded at 2 minutes and 52 seconds with 2 minutes and 8 seconds left of the fourth round. So it was just coming up short of the 209 by just a whisker. But the way the UFC failed is that the UFC stacked the deck in such a way that there was no possible way or conceivable way that Nate Diaz would be able to succeed or be able to succeed outside afterwards. Because we all know that the UFC is famous for putting fighters, their last deal in the contract, we're going to put you up against a nightmare and devalue your stock as best we can. And this was the case by putting him up against Khamzat Chimaev, a guy in Diaz who doesn't always, keep himself upright when people try and take him down. So this was a very clear thing that the UFC intended, and it didn't work out for them. And now they have the terrifying possibility that Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor 3 could take place outside of the UFC. And I think that is the worst case scenario in that regard, because that is a $50 million fight, and they don't have it anymore.
Ben, was this the worst case scenario?
Close to it for the reasons Jay mentioned. They did salvage a pay-per-view. They did salvage what will be a healthy live gate. But in terms of their more overarching plans for the card, sure. This card was built from the ground up. Its entire purpose was to give Nate Diaz a humiliating loss going out the door that would hurt his value going forward. And it was intended to give Khamzat Chimaev a win over a name value opponent and to be able to justify putting him into title fights going forward. And all of that failed. Nate Diaz came out looking like a hero after having them completely over a barrel for the 24 hours before the fight. And then Chimaev blew weight, acted like an asshole, and he's, if anything, further from a title shot than he was a week ago. So yeah, that was a disaster.
You know what, gentlemen? I'm going to disagree. I think, but obviously this is not of the UFC's design. This is a classic case of the UFC slipping on a banana peel and falling into good fortune. The one part of their plan that failed was Nate Diaz walking away humiliated. That's the one thing. But no matter what Nate Diaz does outside the UFC, it does not affect the UFC. It's going to be its own entity. It has nothing to do with the UFC going forward. And I love the fact that he advertised that in his post-fight speech. That was wonderful. But Khamzat Chimaev is still a viable contender because things like meritocracy don't matter. He got a win over a name value opponent. It wasn't a Nate Diaz, but it was Kevin Holland, a guy that the fans know and love. Khamzat Chimaev, who personality was engaging to a lot of people, in my opinion, has not been active enough to hit that register of actual MMA star outside of our media bubble. But one thing that can change that is a heel turn. And what did he do? He made a ridiculous heel turn. He dove headfirst into it and became king asshole on Friday and Saturday. And that's exactly what he should have done in this scenario to preserve his marketing. I think also a little more. I know on this panel, particularly Jay, you said the matchups you wanted to see and how shuffling this card would have made it so much better, and that's exactly what happened.
It did.
So this was the best case scenario for the UFC, but it came about in the most haphazard, ridiculous manner possible.
It was the best way it could have turned out based on the worst case scenario. So it was the best of a bad situation.
Right.
Okay.
And quite honestly, I think it turned out better than what the original intent would have been. Otherwise you would have had a pay-per-view done out of spite. That would have been the only purpose that this served, a pay-per-view out of spite with one fight at the top that probably wouldn't have sold all that much because it honestly wasn't getting a lot of buzz. We talked about how the whole card really sucked out of that first fight. I assume out of that main event.
Yeah.
And they purposely did that to suppress the buys. I feel to hurt Nate on the way commercially, not only physically, walking out that door. But you reshuffle the deck. People are talking about it. I wonder what the buy numbers are looking like, but I'm pretty sure they're better than what they would have been beforehand.
I think that's correct because of the drama leading up to it and the press conference. I think that definitely threw an extra $100,000 or so.
Dude, I forgot about the press conference. I totally forgot about that. And I actually tried to watch it. Like, I never watched the press conference.
There's like 9 minutes. Oh, you tried to watch it, period. Oh,
I tried to watch it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I happened to be at my desk doing some work and like I'm rendering a file or something, so I can't really do anything. So I'm like, oh, let me flip this on and I'll take a little break now. And nothing's going on. Still, it's taking a long time to start. And then when it finally starts, just Kevin Holland and Daniel Rodriguez up there talking, and then all of a sudden Daniel's like, oh yeah, we're canceling this, and that's it. So what a wild week. How would you compare this build up to say a UFC 232 or UFC 151, or what was the one that was supposed to be in LA that got scrapped? I was about to buy tickets for it, and then it got scrapped. Well, it was supposed to be Aldo Mendez too. Was it like 176 or something like that?
Yeah.
So where does this compare out of the doomed or chaotic cards of the past?
It actually happened, so it's not quite as bad as a couple of them. And the actual viewing product was probably more compelling than the original lineup of fights would have been, as Jay postulated a week ago.
Yes.
But, again, the goal of this card was to get Chimaev in position to fight for a title in his next fight, and the UFC isn't going to be able to do that with a guy that blew weight by 6.5 pounds.
They've given title shots to people who lost.
Yoel Romero
doesn't
lost
matter,
how many times in a row?
Like, it doesn't matter. Like, see, Ben, I definitely feel what you're saying, because Khamzat Chimaev does not deserve a title shot, especially at welterweight right now. Definitely not. But it doesn't matter anymore because this is the era of the UFC that we're watching now.
Well, I'm not saying trying to justify it. I'm not talking about meritocracy. I'm going to say
better not be.
They're not going to feel comfortable building a card around it. Yeah. There's just too much of a risk that they won't end up with a title fight.
Yeah, I definitely understand that.
I feel a little bamboozled. I don't like to think that I am susceptible to marketing and advertising like the average consumer. I like to think, I personally like to think that I have a more discerning and skeptical eye. So when I wrote up the news article based on what Dana White said in the scrum following the canceled press conference and the actual look on his face, he's not a good actor. He doesn't have a good poker face. For him to say there were multiple scuffles backstage and one led to the next, and TKO was taking punches and kicks, and he took some water balls in the head, and all of this, I thought, oh, okay, maybe there's something here. And then the UFC decided to release the video. And I've seen worse playground fights in elementary schools. Like, we're talking, there was nothing to this that, oh, we have to cancel a press conference. It made me feel betrayed almost. That I felt, okay, they're canceling the press conference. Something actually happened. Somebody threw a punch. And the commission said, get the hell out of here. Okay, that can happen, but it didn't. And they tried to swing it like that and push the chaos, and all hell broke loose. And you heard all the things that Dana said. I know, I transcribed them, and it was bogus. It was marketing. And I was upset that I fell for it in terms of excitement and in terms of writing about it. Because I didn't add anything to it. I simply wrote I quoted what was said, and I described what happened, which painted a dire picture that was not the case. And so I feel like I contributed to a false narrative, and that really bothers me, because I did nothing personally wrong I don't want to say I'm not a journalist, as a reporter. And I reported what was said and what was observed and what we saw, and poor Li Jingliang trying to come out behind the curtains, and he has his beautiful suit on, and he's about to take the walk, and he puts his hand up, and a UFC staff member grabs him from his side and says, let's get out of here. Got to get out of here. Like, the building's on fire. And it felt manufactured. And once that happens, there's no going back, because then we go into WWE land, and I don't think there's a way to survive that in terms of being thought of as a legitimate organization and body if you're willing to steer into that. And I know, yes, sports entertainment, blah, 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 but this felt different. Because at least for the Jones situation, when the 232, when the commission said you're too high, we won't license you, that's an actual legitimate issue that the state weighed in on and decided. This wasn't the UFC had nothing to do with it. Like, Nowitzki came out there and spoke. He was the mouthpiece, but he wasn't the actual arbiter or anything like that. But this was just them making the decisions to say the things they did. And then Chimaev missed weight. And then they tried to blame it on the doctors, but it was actually his coach. So just ugly, ugly, ugly. And I feel like I want to jump a question if we can do that.
Of course.
Okay, I'm going to switch out one. I'm going to switch one in front of the other, because I'm kind of irritated by the Chimaev situation. I don't think he's fighting again at 170. I don't think so. Because according to his coach, who shouldn't be saying these things, he was vomiting backstage, spasms, illness, all of the bad things, which is why the coach stopped him from cutting weight. It wasn't doctors saying no mas. So I don't know if he's going back to 170. So I guess I'll ask you guys this, and I'll ask you this first. How the hell does the UFC handle Chimaev going forward? And do you think, I know you said that he turned into a villain, and you turned heel, so his stock people might want to see him and want to watch him lose. But did his stock actually go up this weekend?
Yeah, absolutely. His stock definitely went up. Because I'll reiterate, it doesn't matter about him making weight and stuff. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter when it comes to just getting butts in seats and getting the entertainment value going. And also, too, like, it opens up possibilities for him at middleweight. If he handled Kevin Holland the way he did, at one point, a legitimate middleweight contender, like a guy who was sniffing the title picture in the not too distant past, he ran through him. Well, that's a much better win than over Jared Mershart. Like that's a win that says, yeah, I can be a serious force at middleweight, and you've got the credentials to prove it. So this, maybe he parlays this into middleweight title run. That would be very, very possible. And I think a lot of people will be interested to see if Israel Adesanya could handle that, or if Alice Pereira defeats Izzy, could he handle that? It doesn't matter. But I think if I'm the UFC, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give him another crack at 170. It's just going to be over a contender like a Kobe. It's going to be over someone like that, someone who's not likely to get a finish, but could beat him just on skill and cardio. I think too, we don't know the details of what led up to Chimaev's weight cut situation, whether there was an injury, whether there was like a stomach bug or anything like that. I'm reminded of a tweet by, I want to say her name is like Minnie Khabib or something. I've seen her at events, little girl with the thing. Yeah. Who said, if this is true, then, well, maybe Chimaev has a discipline issue. If he was actually at a restaurant the night before the fight or night before the weigh-ins, and he's got a plate full of food and he's drinking a bunch of sparkling water and all that stuff, then maybe you didn't approach this cut seriously. So if the UFC gives him another crack at welterweight, he dials back those vices or whatever bad habits led to the weight miss, or he comes in healthier and he doesn't have an injury that prevents him from cutting the weight properly. I don't think you throw the baby out with the bathwater on this one. Give him one more crack at welterweight. If he messes that up, granted, I would say put it as a fight night, a main event for a fight night. You could make those disposable. Wouldn't be that big of a deal if that were to fall through, if that were to happen at a catch weight. And if he doesn't make that, then okay, you're off to 185. If he does succeed, you're right back in the mix for welterweight.
Yeah, maybe they add a backup, like a co-main event person that can be slotted in case Chimaev messes up, or they do the weird thing like they do in title fights and have an actual person just there to weigh in. Duffy, did Chimaev's stock go up? I mean, are you with Ant on this one? Are you feeling that he's do welterweight, go ahead, and he's a bigger draw because people hate him now, which means, like the John Jones effect, in that love me or hate me, you're going to watch me fight.
If any publicity is good publicity, then sure. But, it just puts him in the same position on the next card he fights on as he was here, because they're either going to have to get him a middleweight contender or name fight if they are looking to push him at middleweight, or they're going to need to run this again if they're convinced he can make 170 going forward and they want to keep him in contention at 170. It will remain to be seen how he's received, how the next card he's on, or the next card that he headlines or co-headlines is received.
I tell you guys, and this, it's not a personal feeling. It's just a series of observations that have been made over the past 2 years since he joined the UFC. I am over Khamzat Chimaev. I'm over him. I don't care. I don't have any feelings about him that go, yeah, I really need to see him fight. I don't like him personally, and that's okay to say, because he's best buddies with Ramzan Kadyrov, a war criminal. Like, there's no wiggle room here, and he's steering into it now more than ever. I don't care when he speaks. He has the same rehearsed-ish lines. It's the same thing every time. I don't need to hear him speak. I don't need to hear him interviewed. I don't need to hear him after a fight. He says the same things. It's not interesting. It's not shocking. It's boring now. And that's the worst thing for me, is that it's just boring. I'm going to kill everybody. I'm going to do whatever. I'm going to kill everybody. And he says that 44 times. Don't care. Fine, fight, shut the hell up, fight, do your job. I'll do my job as a media person. I'll cover it the way I cover it. You do your job as a professional fighter to make the weight that you're supposed to make, and show up at the things you're supposed to show up to. Don't fight until it's fight day, and just shut the hell up. So anyway, Ann Walker, take it back. Take the reins back, please, before I go out too far.
Jay, I'm not mad at you at all. Like I do think like you're looking at this through purist lenses, which I put those glasses on a lot of times myself. So I totally understand that. Yeah. But man, people care. And that's the currency right now in combat sports. So, all right, gentlemen, speaking of people caring, I mean, Nate Diaz had, once again, a fantastic reception everywhere during fight week. And when that fight started against Tony Ferguson, crowd goes nuts. He walks off his final fight in the UFC contract with a win, 4th round guillotine choke, I believe, over Ferguson, in a fight that probably should have happened like 4 or 5 years ago, actually. But anyway, is this it for Nate Diaz? I mean, I don't think so. I mean, this guy said what he plans to do in the post-fight presser. I don't know what promotion takes him up on this offer or what sport takes him up on this offer, but I believe we're going to be seeing Nate Diaz again hitting people for money sooner than later. What do you guys think?
I only have one thing to say, and I'll pass off the reins. Paul fighting Silva, which one? Logan, Jake, that one. Again, I don't think I'm going to get to know their names. I think I'm just going to let it not know. The one that's the Paul brother that's fighting Anderson Silva specifically called out and/or mentioned Diaz, saying something along the lines of, "I'll knock the Stockton out of you," or something like that. So I think we know what's going to happen next.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if he survives Anderson, like,
I think that's one of the few saving grace fights he could have to try and get things back on track when Anderson Silva derails the gravy train, like I think he's going to, and I think Ben Duffy thinks he's going to as well. Anderson Silva derailing that Paul train.
I mean, I'm not sure if Nate is going to limit himself just to boxing, in particular, Paul brother. I mean, I love that post-fight interview. It was just like, yeah, other organizations. He's calling out to Bellator. He's calling out to BKFC. He's calling out to Ryerson. He's calling out to anybody who's going to listen. Open your checkbook. Nate Diaz is here. Ben, where does he show up next?
I think there's actually a pretty good possibility he shows back up at the UFC. He was surprisingly conciliatory in his post-fight interview. Mentioning the UFC in a positive light, mentioning Dana White in a positive light, and most tellingly, mentioning Hunter Campbell in a positive light.
Thank you.
Because Hunter Campbell, for those watching this that don't know, I believe he's now the UFC's COO. He started out as just an attorney for them. He has now taken kind of the contract and hatchet man part of Joe Silva's job. Because Joe Silva was, of course, the matchmaker, but also was the pointy end of the stick for the UFC. He was the one that made and announced the hard decisions and kind of was a dick so that Dana could be the good guy. That's Hunter Campbell. And so for Diaz to mention in such a cordial manner the guy that he's probably going to have to go through if he re-signs with the UFC indicates to me that he's open to re-signing. Because one thing you can always say about either Diaz brother is they got their heart on their sleeve. Like there's no game there. Like usually you're getting a pretty unfiltered view of how they feel at the moment. Like they can be hot-headed. They may not mean tomorrow what they said today, but they mean it right now. And so in that moment, I thought we went from maybe a 5% chance that Diaz resigns with the UFC to closer to 50. I think there's a good chance he fights next in the UFC. And hopefully if the UFC signs him to another 4-fight deal, that's enough to get him and Conor McGregor into the cage together. Because otherwise that will be the biggest pile of money the UFC has ever left on the table that it could have made if they don't do the third McGregor and Diaz fight.
You know what, Ben, I like where you're going with this, but I'm not sure that a 4-fight deal with Nate Diaz happens. You know, I could see him back in the UFC. It's going to be shorter than 4 fights if he signs. The only way it's the other direction is if they sign him to one of those ridiculous contracts to like make sure your career ends there. Yeah, the 8 or 9 fight deal. Yeah, that's the only way that happens. And unless they back up a Brinks truck several times over, I highly doubt Nate signing that contract. I highly doubt it. And then you think about what's going to be out there on the free market for him. The offers from other organizations, the offers from other sports, other promoters out there. You think Eddie Hearn's not aware that Nate Diaz is out on the market? You think Bob Arum? You think like some of these big boxing guys that have a ton of money behind them, that have trashed all these like carnival type fights? Do you think they're not lining up right now in Stockton, limousines pulled up with contracts ready to sign as we speak? Like, this is going to happen, and it's going to take a lot of money for the UFC to pull him away from those negotiating tables. And I'm not sure they're willing to pony up that money, because not only with Nate Diaz will you be surrendering money, you're going to be surrendering power and future leverage that you have with the other fighters. And that's sort of what Nate Diaz's superpower has been his entire career, for someone who's had an otherwise rather journeyman record. And it's sort of kind of middled around through the upper echelon of the sport. He's been kind of barely, one of the best guys, kind of in the top 10, kind of not, for so long. This guy has drastically changed the way fighters can do business. I mean, the fact that he is on the UFC pay-per-view talking about signing to other organizations after the fight, and isn't immediately just yanked out of the cage and thrown into a dumpster,
like
is amazing.
Walker.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I'm telling you this, man. I don't know if you guys saw a tweet that I made, like, as this whole foolishness was unfolding, and it was like, man, we sat here last week and just talked about how Nate Diaz was being sent out to pasture in the most brutal, despicable form possible, and this was going to be just the nail in the coffin to everything about the Diaz mythology. And somehow this guy pulls a rabbit out of his ass and walks away the big winner, defeating another legend. I'm sure renegotiated his pay for something absurd. Got Tony Ferguson paid as well in this process.
Not to Dana.
Yeah.
I think Nate Diaz could possibly be one of the MMA gods. Like, he could just be a materialized version of an MMA god. This dude is changing things like we've never seen before.
I'll throw a tiny little bit of like a splash, just like I dip my fingers in the water, splash of cold water on one of the things you said. There's no MMA league in the world besides the UFC that can afford Nate Diaz. He's not fighting in Bellator, not fighting in PFL for a maximum opportunity of $1 million. He'll blow his nose with that money right now. Ryzen doesn't have Ryzen, and I can't really say anymore because I don't want to spoil anything. Ryzen has his money tied up right now. One championship, I don't think, is real. And there's nowhere for him to go in MMA.
Okay.
So boxing.
One championship, all they got to do is sell some more bricks, and they can afford Nate Diaz.
No, but he's not the Bushido way or whatever, honor and nobility and.
Yeah.
Actually,
Shinya Aoki is, yeah.
Although I don't think, is it Singapore or is it? I thought it's Singapore that you can't have marijuana. That it's a crime. It is an almost an executable crime.
Yeah.
And they're once based in Singapore, so that's never going to happen in a million years.
The wheels can be greased on that. That's
one championship is based in Grand Cayman, which is very weed friendly.
That is true, but the UFC did cancel Edgar versus Lamas, the Edgar versus Faber. The card that was supposed to go over there, that was supposed to take place over there, and the UFC staff was going to get drug tested, so they canceled the event because they were afraid. Was that Philippines? Anyway, the point is boxing is where he'll be, because it's the only place that has the deep pockets that can throw the $5-10 million checks that Diaz is looking for.
Do you think Bellator couldn't come up with that money right now if they wanted to, backed by Paramount? Do you think the executives at Paramount, knowing that they own this mixed martial arts property and knowing one of the hottest the hottest names in the sport is a free agent, if we toss this guy $5 million, we can have a pay-per-view too? Do you think that's not possible?
I don't think it is. I don't think that that's their kind of that's their mindset because it's too big of a capital investment. Like we've seen a much more frugal version of Bellator since the overlords have changed. The post Bjorn era. There's very few expensive signees from the UFC coming over. Like Mousasi was like a 6-figure guy maybe,
but Mousasi was never that big of a star.
I agree, but I'm saying he's about the biggest money name that you can think of that left. Maybe Ben Henderson, Corey Anderson doesn't get paid much. I mean, so it's there is Czech Congo probably clears like 45K checks, and he's I didn't mean that, and he's the best heavyweight they've ever had. I don't think that Paramount is like that. I don't think it's an open funnel. I think it's we're going to give you a budget and you're going to deal with it, and good luck to you. And they'll sign more Dovladan Yagshimuradovs than they will Nate Diaz's.
I mean, but here's another thing that other promotions will be willing to do that the UFC probably wouldn't, and that's a one-fight deal.
That's right. That is the only way. It's a one-off super duper show.
Yeah, and then on top of that, PFL, all they have to do is sell one or two parts of their smart cage, and they can afford Nate Diaz. So anything is possible, Jay. Think positive.
Yeah.
All right, fellas. So let's move on a little bit here. Irene Aldana with spectacular liver kick knockout. Do you think she's done enough, that defeat over Macy Chiasson? Do you think that's enough for her to earn a shot at Amanda Nunes?
Yeah, because it wasn't her fault the fight was at 140.
Ooh, that's a good point.
Yeah. I mean, otherwise, anyone can have a shot at Amanda at 145, but no, I think so. I think she probably did enough to leapfrog Ketlen Vieira. Women's 135 is absolutely desperate for title challengers. Anyone showing just any signs of life, any signs of a pulse, she's certainly shown that. Even if that was like a weird kind of fluky win, it's one of the greatest upkick finishes we've ever seen. Yeah, like she's got a little bit of sizzle, and that's all it takes in that division right now.
Jay, do you agree?
Yes. Oh, and the reason why is because of one single punch. It's not because of a kick. It's because of one punch. It's the left hand that she landed on Ketlen Vieira less than 3 years ago. You cannot forget that kind of KO power that she displayed to put away a woman who would otherwise be ahead of her in the rankings. Yes, I think when you look at the two and you have Ketlen Vieira, whatever the heck you want to call it with that Holly Holm fight, I don't know if you can call it a fight, but the Holly Holm situation, the encounter, yes, Aldana's the one, and she's going to get that shot. And I'm giving her a chance. Her hands are fast. And I think as long as she doesn't get taken down and thrown on her back immediately, which is entirely possible, don't count Irene Aldana out here.
Ben, are you going out there saying Aldana could be the one?
I'm not counting anybody out now.
Yeah, no kidding. You don't have an opinion.
That's what we've learned. I don't think she lines up very well as a style matchup, but she's a good boxer. She's got power. If she survives the initial onslaught the way Pena did, she could start hurting Nunes on the feet. Like, Nunes has never been about being unhittable. And now that we know her gas tank can be tested, especially 135, yeah, I wouldn't count Aldana out. She would be a huge underdog. If they fought in December or something, Nunes probably walks in at like minus 450, minus 500. Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see it. Yeah. And that's saying a lot, because odds aside, it's getting increasingly hard for the UFC to find matchups for Amanda Nunes that I care about. And I'm not saying that's the ultimate measuring stick, but as someone who, it is my nature to be interested in fights at the top level of the sport, it's starting to run a little dry there. You know, her losing to Pena actually made things a little more interesting. So yeah, I'd like to see that.
All right.
And you tell us, Aldana, does she have a chance if she gets that shot? And
everybody's got a chance, but I think in order to outbox Amanda Nunes, you gotta survive long enough, and you've gotta actually be a better boxer than her. And I mean, we've seen Amanda Nunes against better boxers than Aldana. I mean, this same person that head kicked Holly Holm, knocked her out. So, and you're talking about one of the best female boxers of all time. So
who clearly outclassed Aldana as well.
Exactly. So if we're doing MMA math here, then no. But hey, I'm interested, and that's what matters. So that's when you got a champ that dominant. That's kind of the best you can ask for. A lot of cases. All right, fellas. So let's keep things moving here. Quick Hits is up next. I'm putting 10 seconds on the clock, and I'm asking you, mofos, a couple of questions here. So, Jay, I'm gonna start with you. All right. What happens with Norma Dumont now that she has handled Danielle Wolf?
I mean, who else does she fight? What else is there left for her to do? Who can she? This is a question I need to ask you guys. She beat Aspen Ladd. That's it. That's the final frontier. Macy Chiasson, Aspen Ladd, Fee Spencer's gone. Megan Anderson's gone. Fight, Kayla Harrison. There you go.
Yeah. Outside the UFC is the only way to go. Daniel
Wolf can fight Claressa Shields in the same card.
Yep, done. Ali, make it happen. All right, Ben. I'm going to ask you a question now. How does the UFC build up Jailton Almeida, and do they force him to stay in the division?
I don't think they need to force him, but I think he's going to eventually choose to stay at heavyweight. He's a big dude, and damn, that was quick.
No, 10 seconds. Go on.
Seconds. Sir. I broke it. You do too.
Well, I mean, all they need to do to quote build him up is just let him keep beating people. I mean, let's tap the brakes a little bit. He's beaten one marginal UFC heavyweight and two marginal UFC light heavyweights, and both of those light heavyweights were tailor-made for him to beat, because they were both grappling specialists that had nowhere near the physical diesel that he does. I do want to see him against a ranked guy next, or a borderline, like kind of one of those 12 through 15 type guys at light heavyweight or heavyweight. But just based on how giant the dude is, I expect he's going to turn into like a 245 pound heavyweight. It's going to be like Linton Vassell, where he looks almost the same on the scale, and you're like, how did you ever weigh 205? You look the same, and you're 248. Yeah.
And speaking of massive Ant Walker, I'm going to ask you a question, because we have another massive fighter in Johnny Walker, who's what, 6'5", 6'6", 235 pounds in the cage, easy when he cuts after the cut. He tapped out Ian Kudalaba, survived some tough situations. Has Johnny Walker finally turned a corner, or is the UFC going to keep throwing him out in his ass?
No, he has not turned a corner. I think he's going to keep spinning his wheels. I mean, Kavanaugh's his coach. Yeah, I have no faith.
But I still can't believe that the UFC actually kicked him out of the building.
Yeah,
and his team,
without his shoes.
Without his shoes.
Although I'm pretty sure they didn't happen exactly like that.
I agree, but yeah. Kavanaugh, in case of Duffy, you seem very surprised looking. Coach Kavanaugh, posted a thing saying that the UFC, once Walker finished, came back from the fight and did his post-fight medicals, maybe he peed in a cup or whatever, they said, all right, see you later. And like he's like, yeah, can I stay and watch the fights? I'm like, no, bye. And then said, I'm packing. Like he didn't. Apparently, he didn't have time to grab his shoes. Is what it sounded like.
His ugly rock shoes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
obviously more than the story than we know, but it just looked. The optics were very.
Oh, look! It looked crazy. That picture of him walking outside the T-Mobile Arena without his shoes, like that looked wild. Yeah, and I know exactly what area that was, like behind the arena. It's probably in between the arena and the media tent that he was in. That looked wild.
And it's Las Vegas. The floors are paved with broken glass.
And I'm sure the concrete was scalding hot. I mean,
oh yeah,
it's like LA just had a massive heat wave because of winds coming from Vegas. So I'm sure Vegas was on fire, but that concrete had to be singing his souls. But man, more to that story. All right, gentlemen. So I'm just gonna start the clock, and we're probably gonna end up ignoring it because I imagine we're gonna talk longer than a minute. Give us your thoughts on Chris Barnett's performance from the weigh-ins to the fight and his post-fight interview.
He bought himself a reprieve. He bought himself at least another fight or two in the UFC, and I call that a win. I mean, he lost the first round to Jake Collier, and then Collier kind of gassed out, shot a terrible takedown, and Barnett, as he often does, all of a sudden moved with shocking speed, took the back, and finished the fight, which is good because he is a treat. He is a gift that we'll keep on giving for as long as the UFC can justify keeping him on roster. And once again, just showed that he is magic on the mic. Like he one-upped himself. He outdid his performance at the end of the John Vellante fight. And it's charming just because Jay mentioned earlier that Khamzat Chimaev's shtick, where he literally yells out, "I have a gun, I'm going to kill everybody, Allahu Akbar." Yes. Like, file that under things that you normally can't say in America unless you got Jeff Dunham's hand up your ass because you're a puppet. Like, file that under quickest way to find out if there's an air marshal on your flight. Like how tired Jay is of that. Barnett, it's charming because it is so unrehearsed. Yes. I mean, he dances when he comes out for his walkout because you can just see that there's enthusiasm bubbling up in his little 5'7" ass that cannot be contained by human means. So he's coming out, he's doing the dance, and he fights like a maniac. Then they put a mic in front of him. What do you think he's gonna do? It's just gonna be like a volcano of like joy and silliness coming out. And I am here for it for as long as the UFC can possibly justify keeping this man on roster. You know, my co-host on the Sherdog Recap, Keith Schillen, said, "I just want cans. Just find like local cans." Because I was even like, dude, on the Contender Series, if there's a heavyweight fight, if you win, you go to the UFC. If you lose, you go to the UFC, but you have to fight Chris Barnett. And he's like, no, not even that. Just get me dudes from like Gladiator Challenge that can are barely trained. Whatever it takes to keep this man in the UFC, and I'm completely on board.
He is officially, and we joked because John Vellante was a rotund, not training heavyweight. He is a UFC fighter with a 500 record with 2 knockouts in his professional career. Huggy Bear, man. It's everything you want in a good, enjoyable, jovial, boisterous fighter. Everything that he does is it's impossible to not smile and appreciate what the dance moves, that, oh my gosh, that big old man can dance like that and continue dancing like that after having his nasal cavities fractured. Like, this is a guy that like the official diagnosis, according to Dana, was he had a nasal fracture, which technically is a broken nose, but it's not, because it's the inner walls and cavities of your nose are fractured and broken to the point of maybe you're not breathing so well out of this side of your face, and not just because of a broken schnoz. So all of that, which, by the way, as we've known, I've never experienced this, I've only known about it, a broken orbital in the bones around here is the second most painful bone to break besides your femur bone, according to the world. So for him to be happy, dancing, laughing with his face hanging like this because it's broken and he's able to breathe but only a little bit and able to say all he said, dance, drink 2 beers, he is the hero. If Nate Diaz is an MMA god, Chris Barnett is an MMA mascot. And I mean that in the most beloved, huggable, you want to see him run around ahead of every fight card. If we need a Burt Watson after he retires, Chris Barnett's my guy.
All I have to say is Chris Barnett for president.
Oh,
That's all I have to say. Like,
I'm here for it.
I'm on board with just about anything this man does. And this, like, if Chris Barnett, if the feelings about Chris Barnett is the one bridge between me and your co-host, Ben, wow, that man pulled off a miracle.
That's love.
That is an amazing man if he could pull that off. All right.
He could be like maybe like a senator first, so that somebody in the Capitol building has to be like, I yield the floor to the gentleman from Florida, and someone would be like, who's the gentleman from Florida? Oh, never mind, that's the gentleman from Florida.
All right, so fellas, let's keep things pushing here because we have to get to the greatest title segment in all of media history. I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcons, when we share something that surprised us or ironically did not over the course of the last week. Jay, I'll start with you. What's your I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcons moment this week?
Well, in other news, other than the UFC, Thiago Santos all but guaranteed himself $1 million paycheck next year because he has now Thiago Santos ranked skidding but ranked light heavyweight was under contract, still had fights left on his deal, and agreed with the UFC to let him go. Which is very, very unusual, by the way. For them to say your contract isn't up, but we're good with you leaving, we can agree on that. That's not an often thing because it's not a cut. It's an amicable separation, which, again, amicable is a word that you don't say often in UFC negotiations.
It goes back to DJ leaving for one championship in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. And it is a stunning coup to me. It's a low-level stunt. Like, it's not UFC 279 stunning, what the hell is going on? It's a, wow, that is an actual good get. Now, Santos obviously is like, what is he? He's 38, going on 63 because he has, like, no knees and stuff like that, and he doesn't pull the trigger anymore. But when the top 2 guys are Rob Wilkinson and Omari Akhmedov, I give Santos a very serious chance to win the light heavyweight bracket. So good for you, Thiago Santos, getting what should be a good check because we like him, right?
And he like goes home every night to a woman who would be the second best woman in the PFL lightweight division right now.
Yeah, maybe that's a side deal.
Yeah,
Sean O'Connell was very. I asked Sean O'Connell about the signing. He said he would have loved to see Santos in the final.
Yeah, Santos would have been a millionaire if he was there in 2018. I think that's almost
2018 Santos.
Fact.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think anybody in PFL want to see that man.
Sean O'Connell would be broadcasting right now from a wheelchair. I love the guy, but dude.
Yeah, it's like, Sean, you don't want that, man. You don't want that.
I mean, that was the year that he was killing Jimmy Manuel and Eric Anders. So
yes.
Yeah. Oh God, that man was a destroyer. So fellas, Ben, I think it's your turn now. What's your I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcons moment this week?
Well, my I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcons moment is definitely of the ironic, I am really not surprised at all variety. In the this dude is never going to learn department. After UFC 279, Tony Ferguson proclaimed himself to be very pleased with his performance at 170 pounds and looks forward to continuing to compete in that division going forward, and kind of just did the whole checklist. Blamed his corner for the poor decision to shoot for a takedown in the 4th round. Gave Nate Diaz some grudging respect, but mostly just said, I felt great and I thought I was performing great. He looked so incredibly horrible on Saturday. Like, I picked him to win the fight based on nothing. I mean, they changed it up barely 24 hours before the fight, but based on how he had looked in the Michael Chandler fight, where, yeah, he ran into a knockout of the year candidate, but right up until that point, he had been beating a top 5 fighter. It's like, he looked rejuvenated. He looked great. That guy, I thought, carves up Nate Diaz. Or if Diaz wins, it's by doing the Diaz thing, just hanging around, refusing to go away, and either wearing him down late, as hard as that is to picture someone doing to Tony Ferguson, or just catching something opportunistic. But no, Ferguson was down 3 rounds to none when he got choked out. Diaz was winning the striking exchanges right from the get-go. And when was the last time we ever said that about Nate Diaz? Like, Nate Diaz started slapping around McGregor in 2015 after McGregor was tired. He put a scare into Leon Edwards last year with like one punch after Edwards had like run him over for most of the fights. But here, he was just faster and sharper than Ferguson right from the jump. And for Ferguson to see something in that performance that encourages him going forward is just alarming. He gives every indication of being a guy that's going to need to be pried off of this sport, probably with a spatula. Like, it's sad.
For the very important record, I think it was Judge Junichiro Kamicho had the fight scored 2 rounds to 1 for Tony Ferguson, and I, scoring for Sherdog for the play-by-play, had Tony Ferguson up 3 rounds.
Yep. Okay, then Jay is not surprised in the same way that I am. Because I saw Ferguson totally losing that fight.
I thought the damage for the leg kicks was way more than anything Diaz was doing, except for a couple exchanges, to the point that I know we were kind of low on time, but Mark Goddard handled that whole 3rd round like a pro. There were some refs, there are some refs, and probably for good reason, that would have called the fight. When Diaz ran away and started going like this, by definition, is physical surrender. Like, let's be clear. It's gamesmanship, and it's Diaz doing Diaz, but it is also a sign of physical surrender when you disengage from your opponent and motion you're good. Hand, I think he even used his hand once, but he shook his head a lot. That could have been TKO retirement. So let's be clear here that Goddard is a pro at what he does, because, and he even touched on this on social media, explaining why he didn't call it, because Diaz and gamesmanship. But I kind of thought that Diaz quit.
I kind of thought that Nate was talking to Kudalaba backstage and decided to try out some of his advice.
All right, what's your I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcon segment?
Oh man, I'm divided. So I'm gonna take 2 if that's all right.
Yes.
I'm gonna split them up real quick here. So first, on the subject of Nate Diaz, not surprisingly, this man decided to post to his Snapchat a clip from his interview with Megan O'Leary that didn't make the air, as he trashed the Project Rock shoes.
So good. It's so good.
Profanely trashed them. And I love the fact that he posted this to his Snapchat to make sure that, yes, this is what I really feel. And unlike Brock Lesnar, who trashed a UFC sponsor on a UFC platform, he did not apologize publicly for it. So... Nope. And they just said it, and it stands where it is. So eat that, Rock. All right. Now, my second one is actually courtesy of MMA Twitter, which surprised me a lot in a good way for once. Because as this whole debacle was unraveling with this reshuffling of the card, a couple of tweets went out there. One of which, at least, was from a well-known journalist, a guy I am personally very fond of. Like as a guy, I like him. That was praising Dana for putting this card together at the last minute, and this is the only promoter that could have done it, if I'm remembering the verbiage correctly. I'm not surprised that some people decided to take issue with that, but I am surprised that those people took issue with it on MMA Twitter in the intelligent way that was done, because the credit belongs to the fighters who trashed the preparation that they had for particular opponents, disregarded certain weight discrepancies, and just decided, okay, I'm still going to fight. It's possible because of them. And also, if we're talking about from an executive standpoint, it was Hunter Campbell that put all of these fights together per Ariel Helwani, that he was the one, and Nate Diaz as well. He is the one that was able to get these fights booked in such a short span. So Dana doesn't get all the credit. And in fact, really, the rich folks don't deserve the credit anyway. So give the credit to the fighters. They're the ones who took a serious risk with their health, their safety, and their careers. So shout out to MMA Twitter for doing something good for a change.
Give a big yahoo to Dana White, boys.
Hey.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, so fellas, I'm gonna deviate just a second before we talk about the upcoming fight night card. What's worse, MMA Twitter, MMA Reddit, MMA Facebook, or MMA Quora?
What's the
MMA
last one?
Facebook is pretty amazingly bad.
Yeah.
Like it's as bad and ignorant as the rest of them, only older. And as the oldest person on this panel, I can say old people are stupid and don't know shit about shit. Like, it's bad.
I don't know what quorum is. If that's like a
It's Quora, I think it's pronounced. It's it's like a site where people ask questions of
it's like Yahoo Answers. Oh yeah, I know
like,
that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've heard of that. Okay. I'm going to say MMA forum culture. I don't necessarily mean the forum that I represent. However, there's a certain
you do.
there's a
outstanding gentleman on the Sherdog forum.
There's a certain underground forum of sorts that lets its flag fly in terms of accusations and allegations that would otherwise be possibly criminal in nature. So yes, if forum culture goes hard. I don't know MMA Facebook. I don't know it at all. I think we killed Duffy. I think it was that bad. I think he had a heart attack.
MMA Facebook is total garbage.
How? Well, okay, how is it what is MMA? Like, is it MMA Facebook? Anybody that talks about fights through Facebook? Is it like Facebook groups? I don't know. I truly have no knowledge of these things.
It's groups. It's groups. Like, it's groups, and it's at least MMA Twitter has a sarcasm and a wit about it that it's a dumpster fire at a lot of times, but there is some level of wit and nuance to it. And also you have participation from active media members, people who definitely know the sport. So you're going to have a lot of intelligent things mixed in. You'll have, when a conversation goes completely off the rails, you'll have someone smart to chime in with something that makes sense and kind of bring it back in. If a discussion doesn't devolve into, the usual internet foolishness. MMA Facebook doesn't have that. I don't see a lot of participants unless you go to a particular reporter's page, their own like fan page or whatever the case may be. Or you don't see a lot of participation from media in there. It's It's just fans just throwing all sorts of foolishness. And I swear on MMA Facebook, more so than MMA Twitter, everyone's ducking everyone. Everyone's scared. Everyone doesn't know what they're doing. Everyone is Dana has a platinum penis or whatever. Like there is like this skew towards everything that we dislike about MMA Twitter, just times 10 in my opinion. But MMA Reddit though,
it's an echo chamber. I know. I'm an approved submitter on MMA Reddit, and I know it can devolve into very. Echo chamber is the right word for it. It is like segments, and they'll be like, this particular thread or whatever will be all in support of Khamzat Chimaev, and you will get shouted out of existence if you disagree. Whereas somewhere else, another faction may take over. So it is very faction based. I noticed. I think the thing about maybe this is probably the result of me not doing a whole lot MMA Twitter wise. Like MMA Reddit wise, I more look at the just straight up martial arts stuff. But it seems like everyone thinks they're an expert. That is a great point.
It's like Reddit. I think Reddit brings that out more people to like, well, in my experience, I have 17 black belts and, I was undefeated in pancration or, it's going to be something like that. And everyone approaches it like they know exactly what they're talking about. And they're the end all be all of any sort of intelligent advice or reasoning. Like if you ever see someone post a video of them hitting a bag The goons come out with all their goofy stuff. Like it's amazing. But sorry, I had to get that one off. I just had to ask you guys that question while it popped in my head. But we do have fight night action to talk about very briefly before we wrap things up here. Corey Sandhagen versus Song Yadong. So get your dick jokes ready for live tweeting fun in this main event. Corey Sandhagen, do you think these consecutive losses, his best days are behind him, and this is the time for Song to shine, or does Sandhagen get back on track here, fellas?
Take it away, Duffy.
I think Yadong is definitely a stiff challenge for Sandhagen. I guess we'll find out if Yadong can hang with a top 5, top 6 bantamweight. I look forward to seeing Yadong stand up. Whether he has the length to deal with Sandhagen, who is a tall bantamweight with good reach. Yeah, on a serious note, this card is surprisingly good for one of those UFC leftovers night cards. When you got 15 fights on a fight night, you know exactly what you're getting. Like on the preview, I called this like Golden Corral. It's like none of it's that good, but damn if there isn't a lot of it. But this card is actually a little better than that. It's good enough that it lost Giga Chikadze in the co-main event, and it's not a total disaster, even though I was very excited to see Chikadze versus Sadiq Yusuf. Just every single fight of the 14 fights is either a really fun-sounding fight, or there's at least one of the fighters that I'm really excited to see and how they do and what they do next. Going all the way down to like the bottom of the card, like the second fight out the gate is Tony Gravely and Javid Basharat. Either of those guys could be a top 15 bantamweight, 12 to 18 months from now. Like that's a really good fight to have buried all the way down in the early prelims. Just lots of good stuff, man.
I'm glad you touched on Basharat, because if you didn't, I was definitely going to touch on Basharat.
His brother might be in the UFC 48 hours from now.
Probably very soon.
Basharat is fighting on Contender Series tomorrow night.
And he is the Oran Kalon destroyer, so he will always have always have that to his credit. Yeah, man. I was looking at this card. I've been looking at this card. I'm like, okay, what is the weak point? I can look at a fight and go, okay, Nick Mota, Cam Van Camp, the loser's probably out of the UFC, but it isn't a pink slick derby event like you'd think it would be. Like I like the UFC is hammering and signing the heck out of fighters on Contender Series, which leads me to believe that the UFC will be filling out cards with 2-fight losing streak versus 3-fight losing streak in an effort to try and weed out some of the fighters and do that and dump them. There are not a lot of fighters outside of Alan Amatovsky that is definitely out of here and losing their next fight. I can't think of many more. And that makes me intrigued in a way that I didn't think I would be coming into this ridiculously 15 fight card. And I guess if there's one fight I want to pay attention to more than anything, it's a prelim fight between Damon Jackson and Pat Sabatini, because the ground stuff is going to be so much fun, which means 3 rounds of average kickboxing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we're going to get some K1 action for sure.
Yeah, that was definitely the fight that I wanted to point a spotlight out, because even at the very least, Damon Jackson fighting, something strange will happen. Like that, yes. At least that is a guarantee. Like something unusual will happen. I agree. Like this card has some action matchmaking. It looks, it's sneaky good for one of the post pay-per-view cards. It's almost like, from an action standpoint, you'd almost swap a lot of the names and matchups on this that were on the pay-per-view. Like it feels like some of the stuff was done on
RoboCop. Yo,
that would have been beautiful,
dude. Someone is getting KO'd. So that is a pay-per-view opener to guarantee someone's getting knocked the heck out.
Exactly. Like that's one that feels like, oh, y'all sure y'all didn't run this back last week? It just seems a little out of place. But yeah, and Andre Feely obviously is no stranger to an exciting fight as well. So there are a lot of names over here. Like we'll see if Tanner Boser drops the ball with another pop star. Like we'll see. There are so many good things going on in this card. So I'm very surprised that we got something to look forward to after a pay-per-view. That's very rare. All right, gentlemen. Well, I think that'll do it for this edition of the Living Death Show. Big shout out to Ben and Jay for joining us. You can bring him back.
Hey, what up, Elias?
Okay.
Hey.
Yeah. The guys want to see Elias.
Yeah, I was coming back. I just
Okay. Come here, honey. All right. So you want to say bye to the people? You want to say bye-bye? Say bye-bye?
No.
No.
Yeah.
Yep. That's a wrap there.
So Jay and Ben, you can check their work on SureDog.com. They'll have plenty of fight week coverage for you. And of course, you can find me nowhere because I ain't around, unless I feel like opening Twitter, which doesn't happen all that often. So like, subscribe, share, tell a friend to tell a friend, tell that friend to tell 10 more friends. Stay beautiful, stay positive, take your naps, and stay sexy. I'll see you when I see you. Peace.